Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I am Heather Hayes, pastor at First Presbyterian Church here in Cedar Rapids and host for this morning's show. I have a bit of a confession to make. I am a bit of an Apple junkie. Early on, I hopped on the iPhone bandwagon and have been regularly upgrading year after year. I added in an iPad, and so I was one of many who received a message back in February from Apple CEO Tim Cook regarding their company's response to recent rulings in a California court. In the investigation into the terrorist attack and shootings in San Bernardino, the FBI had come into possession of a cell phone of a deceased terrorist suspect, Sayed Farouk. Unfortunately, they were unable to access the information on the phone because of the security measures put in place, available on every iPhone product. While Apple had agreed to allow access to all data that was on its servers, as well as providing technical support to the FBI, they were unwilling to help crack those security measures for the iPhone. Apple pushed back, refusing to acquiesce to the court's ruling and cited that the government would then have the power to reach into anyone's device to capture their data. The government could extend this breach of privacy and demand that Apple build surveillance software to intercept your messages, access your health records or financial data, track your location, or even access your phone's microphone or camera without your knowledge, end quote. Now, some said that this was a publicity ploy by Apple as it tried to position itself as some sort of corporate white knight protecting its faithful customers. Others felt that Apple had valid security concerns. We will be unpacking that war of words here this morning, and I welcome today Dave O'Brien from O'Brien Law Firm, right on my right, and Greg Edwards, CEO of WatchPoint. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, let's jump right in and set a bit of groundwork for our conversation. First off, what exactly was Apple being asked to do?
So Apple was being asked to create a backdoor into the phone so that they could do what's called a brute force attack and get through the password. And the new iOS 9 has a feature that after 10 attempts, it will basically self-destruct. And so what they were asking for was to turn that 10 attempts off so that they could brute force and get into the phone.
Yeah, I know. I've had some serious conversations with my daughters about trying to get into my phone time and time again. But so they were trying to get Apple to write software to go around that feature.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And that's an important point, though, because we're not talking, and Greg explained what it is, and from what I read, we were talking about maybe 5 to 10 programmers working for weeks, perhaps a month or more, developing and then writing the code necessary in order to accomplish that.
Right.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yep.
So
Yep.
You have your government, as a result of a validly issued search warrant, requiring a third party to work for free of 10 of their employees for a month at a time to develop something that they didn't really want to develop. Yeah. And of course, that brings us to why we're here. A lot of issues are raised by that.
Mm-hmm. And so, what exactly were Apple's concerns? It seemed in that they had a number of them.
Yeah. So the issues aren't really just with Apple. So the issues were that they would be creating a backdoor to allow a vulnerability that then you can't, in the cybersecurity world, once you create an opening, you're not just creating an opening for one entity. No matter how secure they try to make it or how they position it, someone else is going to find out about it. And essentially, Apple's concern was that it would then open up the iPhone to any hackers that want it in. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be difficult to hack it, but as we've since found, it could be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Apple has security as one of its top selling points across the board, that it says that it can't even get into your data, correct? Yeah, so it would be harming its own brand in some ways.
Correct.
Right. But there's a flip side too. And this is one of these issues that I was really glad to see Apple take a stand. Not because I necessarily agreed with them, but because that there were some really critical issues that need to be addressed and the courts need to be addressed. And because we did have national security issues involved. And I think a lot of times that's perhaps thrown around a little too much or a little too easily. But in this case, it's pretty clear that those phones might contain some information that could be helpful. And who knows what kind of information that would be. And it might be something that wouldn't be helpful for another 3 months or 6 months down the line. But a small piece of information that could be part of a larger piece to a puzzle that would solve and prevent the next terrorist attack. So critical issues at stake. The government took a stand, which whether you agree or disagree with it, you certainly understand why they felt that was necessary. Apple decided not to immediately comply and contest it, and that's what our system is about. Then the courts get to step in and try to resolve that. In this situation, we found another way around it, or they did, right. I should say. Right. But it's one of those where you're glad to see the system working the way it should.
And speaking of that system, Dave, could you explain a little bit about what was the legal basis for the government's request?
Yeah, a lot of people. I think a lot of people get confused because you think about, just Apple. It's national security. Apple gets a warrant. They should just respond to it and comply with it. It's not as simple as that because the warrant, of course, goes to the people that own the phone, the terrorists, now deceased terrorists, and certainly validly issued. And there's no question that Apple, as they immediately did, would volunteer to provide the information that they would normally provide under a warrant, which would be anything that they had on the cloud or anything that they had immediate access to. Then the question becomes, what can you force them to do in order to get information that they otherwise don't have access to? And that gets to be a lot more critical. I find that in these issues, in Greg's world, we're talking about the cyberspace and security, and it really gets hard to think about these issues because it's not as concrete as we could in other examples. So if you can come up with an example that's more concrete, I think it helps better. So like the iPhone case that went to the Supreme Court, where now if you get arrested and you bring your phone in, they used to just kind of scroll through it and see if there was anything on there interesting. Well, there's now some jails did that. There's now a Supreme Court case said that that's a violation of your constitutional rights. If they want to look at your iPhone, even though you've been validly arrested, they've got to get a search warrant, prove probable cause for the basis for going through this iPhone. And the reasoning was very simple. I mean, iPhone isn't just a little simple gadget anymore, it's our whole lives. Right. And that's what the Supreme Court justices wrote about. I mean, this is like the quintessential diary that was always protected under the law for years and centuries, pen and ink. So in this case, the only scenario I can come up with to explain it from a practical standpoint is to think about a building where they want to get into this building and search this building and it's been booby-trapped, and they go to the people next door and say, we have to go through your building and we want to dig down through your basement and go across and then dig up in their basement. And not only do we want to do that, but we want you to do all the work.
Do all the shoveling.
And it's kind of like, well, wait a minute, we're not sure that we really want to do that. And by the way, we might think that'll cause our business to be shut down for a while, could have long-term economic effects on us. And, I don't think that's a perfect example, but I think it gets a little bit more to the heart of the situation.
And, an email that went out to all of the iPhone users that they had on record or were tracking on their own data, that really brought this particular case to the fore. But is this really a new issue at all?
So it's really not a new issue. There was a legislation passed in 1994 to create what's called the Clipper chip. And shortly after, so basically said that all U.S. manufacturers that were using encryption had to give the government a key so that they could get in. Well, shortly thereafter, a hacker named Matthew Blaze came out with a workaround to bypass that, and basically the government gave up on that one. So that was as far back that I know of, 1994, that the government tried to circumvent encryption.
Okay. Are there any other cases that you know of that are going on?
Oh, there are cases where they're trying to get into iPhones and electronic devices, and you had the statistic. The New York Police Department had how many phones that they're trying to get into?
Manhattan District Attorney has 175 phones that they want access to right now. So by Apple creating, and it's not just Apple. Apple only has 13.5% of the market share of phones worldwide. So Samsung has 23.8%. So
And all of them have some sort of type of encryption.
Exactly. Apple happens to have the best right now, but these other companies are developing better and better encryption to protect their users. So, yeah, I mean, this, by legislating a demand on U.S. companies, isn't going to solve the problem. And there are lots and lots of other cases, and it's not going to stop here.
There might be a legislative partial fix, but it's all going to come back to the facts of each particular case. As you said, that 157?
175.
175.
Just in New York City.
And for each one of those, there has to be a specific factual analysis of the basis for the claim and the justification for seeking entry and all of those things. This one gets to the forefront because clearly the security interests at stake and involved are so high.
Yeah, it was very, very stark.
Exactly. I mean, we all can agree that if there's something on that phone that's going to stop the next terrorist attack, that the government has a pretty darn strong interest, and well, they should to get access to that. And that's why we get into this really kind of conundrum.
Yeah, but another problem is that there are 865 apps right now that are encryption apps that you can add on to a Samsung phone, an Apple phone, any kind of smartphone that allow you to send encrypted messages that breaking into the phone does nothing to get at those messages. One in particular is called Telegram, has 100 million users already, and was created by a Russian entrepreneur. So there's not one fix to this. You can't just force Apple or force any of the companies to give you access to the phone, because there are other apps that can go on top of it that will circumvent everything else that was done.
So when they talk about terrorists and criminals going dark, there's a lot of different ways that can happen.
Yeah. Right now there's 865
65 different ways.
that are completely independent of the phone manufacturers.
Right.
And if you shine a light on those people going dark, it's like cockroaches turn a light on in the room. It's all scattered, and they're coming up with different ways to get around it. So it's always a question of getting the toothpaste back into the tube.
You're full of good analogies this morning. So legally, one of the things in the quote that I read, legally Apple, at least one of their stated concerns was about precedent. If they had been compelled by our legal system to hack into their own operating system, what else might they be able to be compelled to do by the government? And it got pretty, they could make us give up your financial records and your health records, and so really what was, is that true?
It's very true. So we are a cybersecurity company, and one of the things that we do is what's called ethical hacking. And we have an application that once you take over a machine, so once you take over a laptop, for example, then you have access to do anything. You can take over the phone, the camera, for example. So you can take pictures and video of the person that you've taken over their laptop in the same remotely. Yeah,
I think I've seen that on CSI.
From anywhere in the world, and the same thing is true with the phone. I don't know exactly where. Hopefully, the government wouldn't want to go that far. But it opens that up.
That possibility.
Yeah.
The legal issues were very significant in this case. There are some case law out there that writing code, computer code, is a form of speech. And speech, of course, enjoys significant protections under our Constitution, the First Amendment. And the thought that you could require these employees of Apple to sit down and express themselves through writing code would be like forcing them at gunpoint to give a speech in favor of a certain political position, which clearly would be a violation of freedom of speech.
Right.
So you had Fourth Amendment issues, you had the privacy issues, unreasonable searches and seizure issues, 14th Amendment liberty issues. I mean, it ran the conundrum of all of these constitutional fights that we get engaged in these kinds of cases. It really covered them all.
And that was just within the context of our own country, because there was even articles that I was, since Apple is a global company, what then does this set a precedent for what, they can be asked or compelled to do by other countries in terms of global security?
Absolutely. I mean, if Apple, let's say they didn't fight this, they created the code as Greg responded, and then the Chinese government says, hey, we've got a few phones we want you to hack into, and it's political dissidents that in China that they want to get information about in order to suppress dissent, which would, a complete just a rejection of our form of government. And, what do we do at that point?
Right. Right.
So you forced them to create it, and now it's being used for evil purposes.
Right. Yeah.
It's a really difficult issue.
It is a tough nut to crack. So in all these examples, there is criminal wrongdoing. Seems to be a pretty obvious issue. But as I've been talking to people this last week and saying, well, what do you think? What do you think about what Apple should or should not have done? I've run into people who are like, well, I'm not a criminal. I don't care. They should just it's obvious. They should hack into that phone. So I began thinking, what are the implications of the creation of this backdoor into Apple security for your regular, average, moral person who's on the straight and narrow and isn't thinking that their phone's going to get looked at anytime soon? Are there any worries?
So definitely. I mean, the worry is the hackers that are out there. So this Israeli company that's built the back door in for the FBI now has shown us that there was already a vulnerability there. And do you want the company that's creating a supposedly secure ecosystem to build in vulnerabilities so that our government, I mean, if you think that it's only our government that's going to have access to that, then it's completely wrong. So yeah, it opens up the phone to be vulnerable on so many more levels.
Well, and as just you mentioned, I mean, it's the same systems that are protecting, some might say are protecting a terrorist or a criminal, are also in a different context protecting a dissident or, somebody who is trying to, work in a different context.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's where it gets difficult. And I understand people have real problems with it because in this case it seems so simple. It's a terrorist, and we want to stop terrorist attacks. Do whatever we need to do. Okay, I get that. But whenever you derive these constitutional interpretations and searches, seizure, liberty, privacy, whatever it is, it applies in other situations too by precedent. And as my old constitutional law professor used to say, you can't decide the issue based upon whose ox is being gored. You can't decide it based upon what you want the outcome to be in this particular case, because the next time all of the factual information might be really leading you to the conclusion that you want to do it differently for all those reasons that are very emotional or for whatever reason. And that's why you have to have the precedent that's based without that kind of analysis. And that's where it gets difficult.
Without the emotional content.
Right, because the next time we might all sit here and say, gee, we could all agree that they shouldn't have got in this time, but maybe next time we think they should, or the other way around. And I think that was your point. Most people look at that and go, well, Apple, just let them in. Right? Just let them in. Get this information. Stop that next terrorist attack.
Right.
Because I'm
never going to be a terrorist, I'm not
worried about that. Come look at my phone if it'll stop terrorist attacks.
Right, exactly.
I get that, but you have to keep in mind that the next time it might not be so easy from a moral standpoint.
Right, and if it were that simple that you just give access to this one phone and we can stop the next terrorist, or they have access to a suspected terrorist's phone and they stop a terrorist attack, then great. I mean, I would be all for that, but that's not what we're talking about, not what they would be doing.
So as you have alluded to, and all our listeners know, the FBI were able to find a workaround with an Israeli company and get into the phone and then dropped the suit against Apple. But I'm guessing this is not the end of the issue. What do you think is going to be next on the horizon?
So I think it's definitely not the end of the issue. I don't know what the next legislative step will be. I know that there have already been leaks of the proposed legislation that everyone is up in arms on, and I'm not completely up to speed on that next issue, but certainly not the end of it.
Well, I expect that there will be some people that will be pushing for a legislative resolution of this particular issue, and I think there's a lot of problems with that because, again, each individual case is going to have to be evaluated on its own facts. I'm not saying that there won't be legislative help and guidance that shouldn't be involved, but when you try to legislate something, you know, it's whack-a-mole. It's putting the tube back in the toothpaste. You whack, and it's going to come up somewhere else, and it might come up to bite you in the backside. Because it might come up in a different context in a way that you don't like so much. And these are the, you know, you have to worry about the law of unintended consequences.
Well, you know, speaking of responses individually that pop up, there is a woman down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Barbara Mills, and her daughter was murdered. All of the leads in the case have led nowhere, and the mother has her daughter's phone, which apparently had contacts, messages, as well as a diary that she was keeping. The mother wishes that phone to be opened and is hoping now, because the local law enforcement haven't been able to do that, is hoping that now that the FBI has this key, that there can be this sharing between the agencies in order to go forward on her and possibly find leads on her daughter's murder. What do you think about that scenario? They've opened that up.
Yeah, it shows you that where
Right.
the can of worms can go, and we all wish that we could help this mother
Right.
to find out who the killer of her daughter was.
Or the 175 people in New
Exactly.
York, right?
But it's just not. It's not a simple answer, and I don't have a solution at this point. Do I think that the FBI should help in this one case? I mean, I don't know.
The legal issues involved in that case are the same with regard to whether they're going to try to force Apple, and I don't even know if they tried to in that case, to force Apple to break the code and let him get into the phone. Those would be the same legal issues. But the legal issues from the mother, being the representative of the estate of her daughter, she would clearly have authority to waive any rights to privacy that the daughter would have, and she clearly wants the phone opened up. That makes it a lot easier from that standpoint. And so you still have to worry about what the government can do in terms of forcing the company. Is it an Apple phone?
I believe so.
I believe so, yeah.
I believe so.
And Apple is the only one right now
Okay.
that has the 10 efforts. Then it'll basically destroy
the phone.
that I'm
Right.
aware of. I don't think any
Right.
of the other phones out there currently have that ability, but I mean they're all working on it. So
Can I ask a question, Greg?
Yeah, sure.
Is that a big selling point? Do you really think Apple? Because, boy, I mean, because when you talk about, gee, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a criminal. I mean, I don't need it on my phone. In fact, I probably spend 10 times once in a while because my fingers are fat and don't get it. You know, I might destroy the darn thing on my own
Yeah,
without
so
even trying.
I
don't
really
want that, but do they sell it? Is that a big selling point for them?
it's going to become more and more. So I really don't have anything to hide either, but I have videos and pictures and credit card information, banking information. Essentially, my whole life is on that phone. And if I did something illegal, I think the government should have access to it. I agree. But by giving that access, then you're giving it also to hackers. You can't prevent that. So yeah, I think it is. I mean, to me, it's certainly a selling point because I'm worried about the hackers, not about the government.
Right. Well, and then, you think too, with all of that information on there, again, yeah, that you yourself would be vulnerable to
Exactly.
identity theft versus, if you lost the phone. I know there's been a couple of times I've misplaced it, and I've almost gotten to the point where I've remotely wiped it out
Yeah.
because I was worried enough that if somebody picks that up, they've got they've got a potential to have my information.
Right. Well, and everyone now has their email, so
Yeah.
all of the passwords to your corporate accounts are stored on there, and they're what's called hashed. But a hacker can crack that. So you're giving over. I mean, that phone has so much more information on it. And think about not just phones, but now our cars are connected. Your kid's baby monitor is connected. I mean, they're making toys that are connected. So do you want all of those to have no security around them, or security that the companies have to build back doors into? I mean, it's not possible.
Well, one of the other things that I've found an interesting article was from computer science professor Matthew Green from Johns Hopkins University, and they had the research group that he was working with last fall found a vulnerability in the iPhone, and they notified Apple. And Apple was able to create a patch for it, a security patch, and then they basically announced the security patch and then announced the fact that there was this security vulnerability. And the article that I was reading talked a little bit about, well, now the FBI, now that they know the vulnerability, instead of just classifying it, putting it away, they should, for the security of the larger world, their larger Apple world, hand it over to Apple so Apple can do a patch.
So I don't think it matters if the FBI hands it over, because I guarantee you there
Apple's
are
working on it right
now.
now.
Apple's working on it, but there are thousands of hackers out there that are working on it right now. And there are black hat hackers who are the criminals, and there are white hat hackers. So there are hackers that are trying to find this vulnerability so that Apple will pay them for that vulnerability. So whether the FBI gives it over or not, Apple will patch it.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of
time.
How quickly.
Yeah.
And I just have to, my comfort level with the FBI having this ability is pretty high. I really say that as a person that files claims against law enforcement officers when they violate constitutional rights. I mean, they have and are good about abiding by constitutional rights. And so they have this ability. That doesn't mean that they're willy-nilly out there going to be hacking everybody's cell phone. I mean, they're going to go through the proper processes.
Right.
And I believe that. If they don't, we'll hold them accountable for it.
And they've done in that case.
Exactly. They've got to go through and go to a court and put a factual affidavit together and justify a probable cause for getting into that phone because they have this. So, from my standpoint, I don't really have much concern about them having access to it. The problem is, who else is going to get it? It's an Israeli company, and who are they going to sell it to?
This was a huge black eye for Apple because they're defending their great security that they have, and an Israeli company says, "Well, here you go.
We can
Here's
do it.
the way in." So
Yeah.
Apple will fix this, and
after they find this patch, isn't there just going to be another vulnerability? I mean, it's really probably impossible to 100% completely make it fail-safe.
it is.
And on that note, as we come to the end of the program, you can tell we've just begun to scratch the surface, and this will be a continued conversation for a very long time. It's not easy, and I'm sure it'll be in the news for many years to come. I'd like to thank you for all of this discussion and your participation this morning, as well as thanking you, the audience, who have tuned in and are watching us today. So on behalf of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, thank you for being here. Tune in next week for more issue-based discussion, and take care.
Thank you very much.